The afternoon sun dappled through the tall pines, casting a warm, lazy glow of a quiet lake. Inside his cabin, Marcus was savoring the profound silence, a silence he had worked 60-hour weeks for years to afford. This small cedar-clad retreat was more than property. It was a physical manifestation of his peace, a sanctuary earned through sacrifice. The pounding on the door was a violent intrusion into that peace. It wasn't a knock. It was a series of sharp, impatient blows that shook the frame. Marcus opened the door to find Brenda Walsh, the HOA president, standing on his porch. Her posture was rigid, her fists clenched at her sides. Her face, usually fixed in a mask of tight-lipped authority, was flushed a deep, mottled red. "Open the door right now," she shouted, the words slicing through the calm lake air. Marcus, a tall, broad-shouldered man, had to consciously slow his breathing. He could hardly believe the scene unfolding before him. Brenda wasn't here for the usual petty grievances. A trash can left out too long. A boat docked half an inch over property line. Her eyes, narrowed and blazing with impatience, scanned over his shoulder into the cabin's main room as if appraising something that already belonged to her. "Brenda? What's this about?" he asked, his voice a low, steady rumble, a deliberate contrast to her shriek. "The Johnson family from Lot 12, she snapped, as if that explained everything. When he simply stared, uncomprehending, she huffed in exasperation. "My guests, they're here for a tour of the lake, and the community clubhouse is, frankly, a disgrace today. The cleaners are there. We need to use your place." The audacity of the demand left a metallic taste in his mouth. She wanted to use his private home, his sanctuary, as a temporary lounge for her visitors. Not asking, demanding. It was a statement of pure entitlement, an assumption that his space was community property, to be commandeered at her whim. Marcus felt the weight of the moment. He was a black man standing in the doorway of a home he owned outright in a predominantly white community, being ordered to vacate it for the convenience of a white woman who held a little power in a homeowners association. The historical echoes were not lost on him. They were deafening. "No," he said. The word was calm, absolute, and firm. It held no anger, only finality. "This is my home. You can't use it." Brenda's eyes widened, then narrowed again, as if she were malfunctioning. The refusal was so entirely outside her expected script that her brain seemed to short-circuit. The flush on her neck deepened to crimson. "What did you just say to me?" she seethed, her voice dropping into a venomous whisper. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to? I am the HOA president. We have certain expectations of cooperation here. And I have an expectation of privacy in my own home," Marcus countered, his hand still firmly on the door. "The answer is no." That's when the HOA president absolutely lost it. The carefully constructed facade of civility shattered completely. Her composure evaporated, replaced by raw, sputtering fury. "You selfish, inconsiderate man," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "This is about community. You've never fit in here. You and your unfriendly ways. We let you in this neighborhood, and this is the thanks we get? I'll have you fined. I'll have this brought up before the entire board. You will regret this." She was jabbing a finger toward his face, her whole body trembling with the force of her rage. But Marcus didn't flinch. He stood his ground in the doorway, a bastion of calm against her tempest. Her words, meant to intimidate, only solidified his resolve. He wasn't just protecting his cabin. He was protecting his dignity. As she stood there, quivering with impotent fury, he gave her one last, cool look. "We're done here," he stated quietly. And slowly, deliberately, he closed the door in her face, shutting out the distorted reflection of entitlement, and leaving only the hard-won, peaceful silence as home. Marcus had always dreamed of owning a lakeside cabin. It wasn't just about the stunning, mirror-like view of the water at dawn, or the gentle lapping of waves against a private dock. It was about something deeper, the promise of peace, the sanctity of privacy, and the profound satisfaction of having a place that was truly, unquestionably his. Every extra hour worked, every promotion sought, and every dollar saved was a brick laid in the foundation of that dream. The cabin represented more than an investment. It was a physical proof of his perseverance, a quiet monument to his hustle. But along with the deed to the cedar-clad retreat and the key to its sturdy oak door came something he hadn't bargained for, something far less peaceful. The Lakeview Crest Homeowners Association. Like many HOAs, this one came with a thick binder of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, but it also came with a reputation. It was known less for fostering community and more for its strict, often bossy, and sometimes downright unreasonable enforcement of petty rules. The neighborhood WhatsApp group was a chronicle of its reign. Debates over mailbox styles, citations for unapproved flower species, and heated arguments about the precise shade of beige allowed for exterior paint. And the person at the very center of this web of control was the HOA president, Brenda Walsh. To Brenda, the rules weren't just guidelines, they were a personal manifesto. She was a woman who thrived on order, her own narrow definition of it, and she never missed an opportunity to remind residents of their obligations. She patrolled the neighborhood not with a smile, but with a clipboard, her eyes constantly scanning for infractions, her posture radiating a chilly authority. From the very beginning, Marcus had noticed something off in the way she treated him. While other new homeowners might receive a grudging welcome packet, Marcus received a suspicious once-over. His friends, diverse in background and boisterous in their enjoyment of his new place, were often questioned. "Are you all residents here?" His meticulously maintained yard was scrutinized for blade lengths other lawns seemed to get away with. A beautiful, tasteful Adirondack chair he'd placed near the water's edge prompted a warning about unapproved structures, while his neighbor's nearly identical chair went unnoticed. It was a pattern of behavior that felt less about rules and more about him. It was a subtle implication, woven into every interaction, that he was a guest who needed monitoring, not a full member of the community who had earned his place. He wasn't naive. He understood the unspoken dynamics at play. He was a single black man in a predominantly white, conservative-leaning community, and his presence, it seemed, was itself considered a minor infraction by its highest official, one she felt compelled to manage. But her previous actions, however irritating, had been containable. They were skirmishes on the periphery of his peace. This, however, was different. This wasn't a nitpick about the height of his grass or the permit for his grill. This was a fundamental assault on the very concept of his ownership. She wasn't just scrutinizing his property. She was trying to commandeer it. She wasn't questioning his right to be there. She was acting as if he had no rights at all, as if his deed was a mere formality and her authority granted her a master key to his life. This was a line being crossed, not with a misapplied defending his very right to have it. The afternoon sun was a brilliant, forgiving gold, painting the lake in shimmering streaks of light. From his Adirondack chair on the porch, Marcus watched the lone eagle circle high above the pines, the only movement in a scene of perfect tranquility. It was a kind of quiet, sunny weekend he had purchased this cabin to enjoy. The crunch of gravel and the sound of multiple car doors shutting broke the silence. He looked up to see a small procession making its way down his driveway. Leading the pack was Brenda Walsh, the HOA president, her stride purposeful. Behind her trailed three other couples, laughing and chatting, laden with the unmistakable gear of a day at the lake. Oversized coolers, bright beach towels, and a collection of fishing rods. For a brief, naive moment, Marcus thought they were lost. Perhaps they'd mistaken his private drive for a public access point. He stood up, ready to offer polite directions. But Brenda Walsh didn't ask for directions. She didn't even offer a greeting. She stopped at the foot of his porch steps, her guests fanning out behind her like a perplexed audience, and made her announcement. "We need to use this cabin for the day. Unlock it." The words were so absurd, so utterly divorced from reality, that Marcus actually blinked, certain the glare of the sun had affected his hearing. The expectant smiles on her friends' faces suggested they, too, thought this was a perfectly normal request. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, the words more a reflex of disbelief than a question. Her expression tightened, impatient at having to repeat herself. "The community clubhouse is overbooked. My guests have nowhere else to change or get out of the sun. As HOA president, I'm authorizing the use of your property for the afternoon. Now, please unlock it." The sheer, unvarnished entitlement of the demand landed like a physical blow. She wasn't asking. She was authorizing. She spoke as if his home were a public utility, A perk of her office she could simply switch on. He could feel the eyes of her friends on him, their initial cheerfulness now morphing into awkward curiosity. Marcus took a slow breath, anchoring himself in the solid wood of his porch beneath his feet. This was his ground. "No," he said, his voice low and even, carrying a weight that silenced the murmured conversations behind her. "You must have misunderstood. This is my home. It is not a rental property, and it is not a community clubhouse. I will not be unlocking my cabin for you or for anyone else." The transformation on Brenda Walsh's face was immediate and terrifying. The mask of bureaucratic authority shattered, revealing a raw, sputtering fury beneath. Her face twisted, the cordial pretense evaporating to be replaced by a venomous glare. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice dropping so only he could hear the full intensity of her rage. "You are being incredibly selfish and unneighborly. These people have driven for hours." She gestured wildly to her stunned guests, now attempting to use them as a human shield for her humiliation. "Is this how you treat guests? Is this the kind of community you want to be a part of?" When her attempt to guilt-trip him met only with a stony, unwavering silence, her volume skyrocketed. The performance was no longer just for him or her friends. It was for the entire lake to hear. "I am the HOA president," she shrieked, stomping one foot on his porch step for emphasis. "You will respect my authority. You will remember who's in charge here." She ranted about fines, about emergency bylaws, about bringing the full weight of the board down upon him. But her words began to blur into a meaningless, angry noise. Because as Marcus stood there, watching this woman unravel on his property, one truth became crystalline and absolute. She was in charge of flower beds and paint colors. She was in charge of mailbox regulations and noise complaints. But she was not, and would never be, in charge of his home. He held her gaze, a silent, immovable monument to that fact, until her tirade finally sputtered out against the unyielding wall of his dignity. The HOA president's tantrum quickly escalated from a private confrontation into a full-blown public spectacle. Her voice, sharp and shrill, cut through the tranquil lake air like a knife, drawing the attention of neighbors enjoying the sunny afternoon. A couple walking their golden retriever paused on the path. A man washing his boat in a nearby slip turned off his hose, leaning over to watch. From across the cove, curtains twitched in windows. They had all heard Brenda Walsh's tirades before, but never one with this raw, unfiltered fury. Her guests, once cheerful and expectant, now looked profoundly embarrassed. They stood awkwardly on the gravel driveway, holding their coolers and fishing rods like misplaced props. They exchanged uneasy glances, their posture stiff with second-hand humiliation. One woman tried to interject, murmuring, "Brenda, it's really okay, we can just..." But her words were drowned out by the president's rant about blatant disrespect and upholding community standards. They were no longer guests on a fun outing. They were unwilling witnesses to a meltdown. At the peak of her rage, she jabbed a finger toward Marcus, her threat echoing across the suddenly quiet lakefront. "I will report you to the board for this. I'll see you fined for non-compliance. We have rules against this kind of hostility." Marcus, however, remained an island of calm in the storm she was creating. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't match her aggression. He simply stood tall in his doorway, a man secure in the knowledge of his own rights. His reply was measured and clear, meant for her and for everyone now listening. "You can report me all you want," he said, his voice carrying a firm, steady resonance. "But this is my property. You can tell me where to park my car or what color to paint my shutters. But you do not get to dictate what happens inside my cabin. That line you do not get cross." His calm rationality was a mirror, and in it, Brenda Walsh's behavior looked utterly unhinged. The more grounded he remained, the more she spiraled. His refusal to engage in her emotional warfare stripped her of her perceived power, revealing the tantrum underneath. She began shouting about her tenure, her service, her sacrifices. "I have been serving this community for years. I deserve a little respect and compliance." But her words rang hollow. To the neighbors watching, it was painfully clear this wasn't about respect. A respectful leader would have asked and would have accepted the answer. This was about something uglier, a naked demand for control over something that was never hers to command. It was about the intoxication of authority meeting the immovable object of personal sovereignty. Finally, the reality that Marcus would not bend, would not cave to her threats or her performance, began to penetrate her fury. The audience of her peers, their expressions a mix of pity and disapproval, likely hastened the end. With a final incoherent sound of frustration, she spun on her heel. "Fine. We don't need his shack," she spat. The insult meant to diminish his pride, but only highlighting her own pettiness. She stormed back up the driveway, a hurricane of indignation, brusquely waving for her stunned guests to follow. They trailed after her, a silent, shame-faced procession, casting apologetic looks back at Marcus. The meltdown was over, but it had left an indelible mark. The quiet that returned to the lake was different now, charged with the aftermath of the scene. The neighbors didn't immediately return to their activities. They lingered for a moment. The image of the president's abuse of authority and very public humiliation burned into their minds. The story wouldn't be about the unneighborly black man who refused a simple request. It would be about the HOA president who finally showed everyone who she really was. The balance of power on the lake had subtly, irrevocably shifted. In the days that followed, the incident at the lakeside cabin did not simply fade into the background hum of neighborhood gossip. It spread like a controlled wildfire, leaping from driveway conversations to hushed talks over garden fences, and igniting community WhatsApp group with a fervor it had never seen. The story was too shocking, too audacious to be contained. Neighbors who had only known Brenda Walsh as a stern enforcer of bylaws were astounded to hear the woman who had demanded a key to a private home, her face twisted in fury on a sunny afternoon. The initial reaction was disbelief. "She did what?" was a common refrain, followed by a slow dawning sense of outrage. It wasn't just outrage on Marcus's behalf, though that was potent. It was a deeper, more personal indignation. If she felt entitled to Marcus's cabin, whose home was next? The underlying principle, that a person's home is their castle, had been violently breached. The idea that the HOA president viewed their private properties as extensions of her personal domain, a portfolio of clubhouses she could authorize herself to use, sent a chill through the community. This collective unease gave others the courage to speak. What started as a story about Marcus quickly blossomed into a broader community airing of grievances. At the local coffee shop, a retired teacher confessed how Brenda had threatened a massive fine because her granddaughter's pink bicycle was an unapproved eyesore left on the patio for an afternoon. Another homeowner shared how she insisted on inspecting his interior renovations without notice, claiming a vague concern about plumbing lines. A young couple revealed she tried to veto their house purchase, telling the sellers they weren't the right fit for the community. The pattern was clear. Brenda Walsh's presidency wasn't about maintaining standards. It was about exercising unchecked power. The conversation had organically shifted from one man's confrontation to a fundamental question of accountability and fairness. The silent majority, who had long grumbled privately about petty citations and overreach, began to find its voice. The question was no longer what did Marcus do, but what were we going to do about Brenda? Through it all, Marcus remained the calm epicenter of the storm. He didn't fuel the gossip or seek out confrontation. He was often seen on his dock, fishing or simply watching the water, a picture of hard-won serenity. The situation hadn't rattled him. It had reaffirmed his resolve. The cabin was more than wood and glass. It was an embodiment of his right to say no. The encounter had proven, in the most visceral way, how essential it was to stand firm on the bedrock of one's own rights. He had worked too hard and sacrificed too much for his sanctuary to allow anyone, regardless of their title, to intimidate him out of it. The biggest lesson reverberated through Lakeview Crest, clearer than any rule in the HOA binder. An HOA governs shared spaces and aesthetic standards, lawn height, trash can storage, noise levels after dusk. Its authority ends decisively at the threshold of a front door. It does not hold the power to demand entry, to commandeer private property, or to dictate how a homeowner enjoys their own space. True authority recognizes its limits. Sometimes, the only way to teach that lesson, to draw that bright line in the sand, is for one person to calmly, firmly and unapologetically say no. That single word, spoken without malice but with absolute conviction, became a rallying cry for a community rediscovering its own agency. And for the HOA president, the memory of that moment, the cold shock of refusal, the embarrassed silence of her friends, the watching eyes of neighbors, and the devastating calm of the man who held his ground, was a piercing and permanent reminder. It was a lesson in humility she would never forget, a public testament that her authority had limits, and that dignity, when firmly defended, is an unstoppable force.